This is Professor Georgeen Theodore. Before I ask you up here, I wanted to acknowledge the presence of our provost, Dr. Ian Gatley, and I'm very glad that you're able to join us.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, great. So thank you, Urs, for this invitation. So I've been thinking about sustainability, and we didn't sort of plan our talks in advance, so I didn't know, Rich didn't know what I was talking about, Rich, and so on. But so of course this is a very popular topic among architects, and it has been for decades. In the 1970s, interest in sustainable architecture reflected the growing environmental movement, and many architects working at that time were committed to the design and construction of sustainable buildings. Oh, Urs told me I couldn't touch that. Thank you. Yet sustainable architecture remained a fairly specialized and somewhat fringe element to the discipline. In recent years, sustainable practices in architecture are almost mainstream, and sustainability has become the buzzword in the discourse. As an area of inquiry, there have been two dominant lines of thinking. On the one hand, there is the camp who believes in sustainability as a way of life. Absolutely everything, from the way a house is built, heated and cooled, to the way food is produced, gathered and consumed, to even the way everyday products are made, used and disposed, are reconsidered with the overriding goal of reducing materials and resources. In this context, architecture sometimes references the materials and methods of pre-modern times, the halcyon days before humans did major ecological damage to Mother Earth. When this return to nature approach is taken to its most extreme, we see radical eco-warriors like this guy living entirely off the grid. Here, architecture is often self-built, and the role of the professional architect is often limited, although there are many excellent buildings designed by architects in this tradition. On the other hand, there's another branch of thinking where sustainable architecture is developed through inventing new high-tech systems to increase a building's energy efficiency. Here, the building operates like a green machine, and the building systems of sustainability are often foregrounded so that they actually become the building's architectural identity. Recycled materials, recapturing water and heat, these are all drivers in the building's design and performance. Architects like Ken Yang led this movement in the early days, and today this approach can be seen in many, many, many buildings, and it's something that's quite familiar to all of you in schools of architecture. So you can say that these two lines of thinking, or these two branches, have their challenges. The return to nature approach that I first spoke about, well, it requires a complete change of lifestyle that for most people would include major sacrifices and hardships like severe reductions in personal water usage, or perhaps giving up the company of others. The high-tech green machine approach, while laudable in so many ways, often suffers from a kind of blindsided boosterism, where the big picture is lost. And I'd point to something like Masdar City outside of Abu Dhabi, designed by Foster's and Partners. Masdar City will quote, rely entirely on solar energy and other renewable energy sources with a sustainable zero-carbon, zero-waste ecology. It doesn't seem entirely in the spirit of sustainability to build a new city on undeveloped land out in the middle of the desert where everything that is needed to sustain daily life needs to be brought in from someplace else. So it kind of begs the question of where is the most effective site or sites for developing and testing sustainable practices. This is something that I've thought about a lot in the past year. I and my partners at Interborough won the Museum of Modern Art Young Architects Program in 2011 with our proposal Holding Pattern. For those of you who don't know MoMA PS1, it's an annual invited competition that challenges an architecture firm to design and build a setting for its big summer afternoon parties, which you can see here. The program is very, very simple, just provides seating and shade for the thousands and thousands of visitors that come every Saturday between June and October. So when we first started the project, we sort of thought, we wondered, what happens to all this stuff after the project is over? This is one of the previous winners. Does it get thrown out, as in the case of this one? Our first thought was that it probably made sense to recycle. Could we design and build something that could be put to a different use after warm-up is over? That's the name of the party, warm-up. The second thing we thought about was the sort of the urban context, that it was in Queens, which is probably one of the most wonderful places on earth. Very, very diverse, very, very vibrant. And so while the party, this warm-up party is nice, it seems very insulated from all the great things that happen out in the city, outside of those 16-foot concrete walls that you see surrounding the museum. So we spent a lot of time in the neighborhood just hanging out and trying to find out what is happening in the immediate vicinity of the site, beyond the concrete wall, so to speak, and we talked to different people. One of the people that we talked to was right across the street. It's a guy named Mike. He runs a Checker Management. It's a cab company. And to make the wait between shifts a little nicer for his drivers, he built this impromptu plaza with plastic chairs and tables, a shade awning, and a few planters. Here drivers sit, share stories, and drink coffee. And we thought this was an interesting space, and it suggested to us that PS1's programmatic requirements, seating and shade, sometimes overlap with the needs of Warm-Up's neighbors. And it gave us an idea for a kind of radical reuse that tries to strengthen the museum's ties to the neighborhood by matching up Warm-Up's programmatic needs with the needs of its neighbors. And so we basically went around the neighborhood and we simply asked every single institution, is there something that you need that we could design for you, use in the courtyard over the summer, and then donate to you over when Warm-Up is over. Here are some examples. The Teamsters, they wanted some outdoor furniture. Boys and Girls Club, they wanted a lifeguard stand. The dogs, they wanted mulch. Eric from the Long Island School of Ballet wanted some mirrors, and so on and so on. So we talked to a lot of different people, and frankly, a lot of them had some very, very bad ideas. And so we had to sort of vet them, and so here you can see on this graph, we've got in the public interest on the x-axis and fun on the y-axis. So for example, we talked to the library in the lower right. They wanted books. That is in the public interest. It's in the public interest, but it's not so fun. Some guys wanted to store a couple hundred millstones. That's neither fun nor in the public interest. So we basically eliminated those and just focused on the things that were fun and in the public interest. And so we built or bought the things that these people requested: chairs and benches, lifeguard chairs, chess tables, trees, and so on. Here you can see everything, and here's every single space that was improved by the project. Here's the map of where all the things go. So for example, Eric from the ballet school, he said he wanted mirrors. Here are the mirrors installed during the summer, and then here they are in their permanent home at the School of Ballet. So we built our whole concept around this concept of we built the whole project around this concept of matches to get this one-for-one direct reuse. And this, of course, enriched the project. We didn't, for example, start the project thinking, oh, we want to use mirrors, or this is a good place for mirrors. But because of the needs of the neighborhood matched with the needs of the institutions and its actual spaces, it made it for a more interesting, more productive, and ultimately more sustainable project. And this idea or strategy of reuse is something that has occupied our thoughts from the very beginning of our practice. This was our very, very first project, which was about a reuse of a so-called dead mall. I'm not going to describe this project right now, but just let me say this. Even though it was a dead mall, a lot of things were happening there. We saw lots of signs of life or potentials for new life, such as small business, casual community uses, and so on. And we tried to find homes for these emergent programs on the side of the dead mall. We tried to incubate these cultures by finding, or you could say matching them with the available spaces in the vacant building or parking lot. And I would say that there's really a lot more room for this type of thinking. In 2011, there was 859 million square feet of US store space that was empty. And the vacancy rates in the office sector have been extremely high, around 16%. And residential rates have been rising since the crisis started in 2008. So there's a huge amount of built space in the so-called middle landscape, a zone some people call the suburbs, or what the German planner Thomas Sieverts refers to as the in-between city, or in-between landscape, which was loosely translated as where we live now. So I ask you, wouldn't the most sustainable thing to be to rethink the reuse of this in-between landscape? And what kind of skills would, and if you agree with me, what kind of skills would be needed to rethink their reuse? So I would say that there's a special role here for the urban designer and the infrastructure planner, where the focus is not primarily on building materials and methods, but instead on intelligent goal-based research that is conducted to understand the local practices and cultural dynamics of a specific place. So the future of this landscape is not in one-size-fits-all architectural solutions like malls should become housing or office parks are the new academic campus, but instead should be a practice of matchmaking where the designer works more like a strategic planner. She identifies local cultural practices that would benefit from the spatial and locational conditions of a specific building or complex and matches them up. Like matching a need for, like say, a large rec center with a vacated big box retail store that has the clear spans and heights to support indoor sports and so on. So this requires an ability to do detective work, to look closely at a place for clues. It requires an understanding of buildings and programs and space, and it also requires a basic knowledge of the larger, often invisible forces, such as real estate dynamics. So we've been doing work in this vein over the past couple of years in the infrastructure planning program and in the course Visualizing Infrastructure. We've looked for opportunities to rethink vacant or underutilized infrastructures through design. I'm not going to talk about that right now. And so in summary, I've been thinking about the more spectacular approaches to sustainability, returning to nature, or say the green machine, and I'm convinced that these more spectacular approaches overlook some pretty big opportunities. I'm advocating for practicing sustainability through more site-specific, pragmatic approaches that creatively reuse our existing, underutilized, but endlessly fascinating in-between city.